You are listening to Spilling the Tea, a real estate podcast with Kristy Macero and Shelagh Maycheck.
Hello everyone, welcome to season 2 of Spilling the Tea. We are your hosts, Kristy Macero and Shelagh Maycheck. Hello. Sitting with us today is reoccurring guest agent Julie Pham. You probably remember her from her riveting and horrifying open house tale from last November. Mm-hmm. And of course, the lovely in-house everyday man, Jeremy Pue.
Hello.
Today we will be discussing in detail the uncomfortable situations we may find ourselves in when clients push us to the boundaries. They test our limits, or for lack of a better term, they're in the wrong. A lot of the time. These situations call into question who's in charge. As realtors, we must abide first by our clients' lawful, an emphasis on lawful direction, followed by the code of ethics and rules of cooperation. And then as long as the lawful client's instructions are within that, we basically agree to do whatever their wishes are. But before we get into all of that, Shelagh, I have some questions to ask you.
Okay.
Have you ever had a client do something to your core that you just did not agree with?
No?
Okay.
I was not expecting that.
She's a badass.
Kristy pre-screens them pretty well before I get my hands on them.
That's probably true. I run a lot of interference.
Yeah.
But we have had people ask financial questions, about...
So I'll have people ask me all the time. They'll be like, hey, I really like this place. I want it as an investment, but I'm just going to can I just say I'm moving into it so I don't have to put 20% down? Because I know you're supposed to with an investment.
Yeah. Who checks that?
Okay. Like, dear sweet baby buyer. That's fraud.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, people do what they want to do in those situations, but we could never give the advice, commit mortgage fraud.
Yeah. So, and I don't blame people for asking these questions because they'll see so much content on social media and online right now, and they'll get advice from someone on TikTok and someone on Instagram or their Uncle Dave and tells them how he saved $50,000 in 1980. But people are going to ask, and I don't mind them asking, but I am going to let them know, like, dear sir, no.
So when they ask you a question like that, does it taint your relationship with them a little?
No, depending on how they're asking, but if it's just an innocent question, I totally understand because half the time we're there to educate people too.
Right, and so then how do you kind of handle that with them? Do you what do you say to them where you kind of let them know ooh?
I'll explain to them why that's wrong, and I'll be like, if you would like to pursue that further, it would not be with me, but all the power to you.
I'll find a shady agent that'll do it for you. No, I'm just kidding. No, we don't do that.
There's so many forms for referral fees now.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's good because ultimately we don't necessarily want to work with people who are committing, mortgage fraud intentionally, but maybe they're asking a question that they don't know is not okay.
Yeah. They're like, prices are really high. I don't have this much down. I'm trying to save up for it, but the prices keep increasing. Is there any way that I can get into it now for this money?
Yeah, and I think the big emphasis on that is how is the person asking you, and are they asking you at a point of not being educated?
Yeah.
So I've had a grand total of 3 situations that I can think of where I really didn't agree with my client. And in my very first year of real estate, I was fortunate enough to be put up in these brand new houses. Didn't really love the construction. I actually ended up pulling my name off of them because I decided early in my career that integrity is better than just doing a bunch of deals. But the build quality I didn't really love who I was working with, and I didn't really agree with it. But when I was there was a buyer that came along and wanted to write on a house, and I'm thinking, jackpot, that's perfect. Except the guy, I think he was trying to really impress his wife, or maybe his wife's family, I'm not sure. But he kept asking me to do something called a vendor take-back mortgage with the seller. So he wanted me to approach the seller and say, hey, could you finance, the situation? Right. The seller was a builder. So it wasn't a crazy request at the time. I, of course, was brand new, so my fingers were crossed, hopefully I'm doing this right, because it's not something that we see very often. So anyways, fast forward, we're in the middle of a contract because back then we didn't ask as many questions up front. We would kind of write up the offer, send it over, and then call the agent and be like, oh, check your inbox, really calm because it wasn't a quick moving market. We didn't have to have those questions up front.
More back and forth.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I had like no experience at this time. So I didn't even ask questions like, oh, are you pre-approved through the bank? Like nothing. Okay.
Right.
Like this is how new I was.
I don't know this, Kristy.
I know, right? Yeah. So it's brand new. Except what you do know about that, Kristy, is that, she stands her ground. Okay. I asked the seller, and I put it in writing, hey, how do you feel about doing a vendor take back mortgage? And it was in the contract. I had the proper clause and everything. And the seller said, at this time, that doesn't work for me. And he crossed it off of the contract and he sent it back. So I went back to the buyer and I said, unfortunately, this is not something that he is prepared to do. And he goes, oh, well, just ask him again. And I said, okay, sure. So I wrote an email, asked him out and sent it over and got it back. And the seller goes, unfortunately, at this time, that is not something we are willing and prepared to do. And I said, okay. So I called my buyer up and I was like, oh, hey, got news. Unfortunately, that's just not quite working for him right now. Like, we should definitely find a different way to go through this with the bank. And he's like, okay, well, that's ridiculous. He should be doing this for me. Ask him again.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow.
So how does that feel? Right? Like, can you feel that in your body?
Yeah.
Because we have a duty to look professional.
Right.
So what do you do when somebody is asking you again? And I'm like,
As per my last email.
yes.
Yeah.
Sheila's assistant power move. As per my last email, kind of like, I'm not going to repeat this.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So now, and Julie, you can probably attest to this, like, it would look, I feel like it would look unprofessional for me to go back again because it's been made so clear. So I said to the guy, I said, unfortunately, we have been told no by the seller on 3 different occasions, and we might have to look another way. And he goes, well, I'm your buyer, and I'm telling you to do this for me. And that was the tone that he took. And doesn't matter if it's today, Kristy, or 10 years ago,
no.
Kristy. Oh, it ain't happening.
Yeah.
So I was like, listen, he has been told no. You're clearly not someone who gets told no very often. I understand that this is difficult for you. Unfortunately, at your line of work, if somebody comes in and can't afford something, do you finance their purchase in your store or do you tell them to move on? Like, I had to be that blunt with this guy because he was so condescending, as if I didn't have the capacity to ask this question.
Right.
Okay? Like, I wasn't selling it well enough. And I basically was like, dude, you don't have the money. We got to move on. And I was on a 3-way call with him and his wife. I'd never talk to them after that. I'd lose my number. Okay. That's how bad it can go when people get so demanding and they want you to keep asking questions to the point where it almost looks like it's going to reflect more poorly on you
Right.
for doing that.
Yeah.
But maybe the 8th time the charm.
Yeah.
Just maybe.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance.
So you're saying there's a chance. So Jeremy, you work with all different kinds of people, lots of agents, lots of marketing companies, the everyday man. You work with everybody.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a client ask you to do something that you weren't comfortable with?
Yeah. Well, it happens all the time.
Okay. I wasn't expecting that. So please.
Yeah. Well, but it kind of falls into 2 categories. So obviously there's a legal category. Where we get asked all the time with like drone operations in particular.
Right.
It's like, oh, why can't you just like fly 20 feet high? And I'm like, because the runway of the airport is right there, and it's illegal. So we get
It's
asked.
frowned upon.
Yeah, so we get asked about all of that all the time. And then the other one we run into quite a bit is because we do so much run and gun stuff like around towns and cities. Is
Figuratively.
Is like, yeah.
We have a lot of law enforcement clients. He does not have
Not
guns.
actually gunning.
No.
And it's like the privacy issues.
Right.
So people's faces and like, so one Adrian and I get a lot is, can we get a couple shots of this elementary school? And I'm like, no, we cannot.
Oh.
Right? So they want to feature
911
the
call.
community.
There's a guy running around with a camera taking photos of children.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's this whole like, no, I am not stepping within 100 feet of an elementary school with a
'Cause you're
camera
not
in my
allowed.
hands.
Yeah.
I'm not on a list.
I'm
My
not-
court order says no.
It's 200 meters, actually.
Oh, this is going bad fast.
I've asked my videographer, like previous one, to do that, and
Did
I
he do
never
it?
thought of it.
Did he do it?
I think so.
He wasn't supposed to do that.
I
That
feel
one's for
so
free,
bad
Julie.
now.
I mean, there's like, if there are no kids' faces in it,
Right.
it's technically okay.
Okay.
But I'm in a position where I don't want any sort of bad rep for my
But
company.
you also have 3 kids that go to school. Like,
Totally.
how would you
And I
feel?
wouldn't, if I was driving past and saw a guy with a video camera, I would be like, don't really love that.
Don't be suspicious.
So there's the legal side, and then we deal with this like crazy other side that is people that just have terrible ideas. And they're like, here's what we're gonna do. And I'm like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard
And
in
you're
my
like,
life.
no, we're not.
Exactly. So I have to talk people down quite a bit.
Right.
But I would say it does happen like probably every other week something happens where I'm like, no, we can't fly there. No, we can't video those kids.
I love that sentence. Yeah.
Yes, you need clothes on.
Yeah.
What?
Separate statement.
I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, has anyone ever done that to him? This is a different kind of video today.
Yeah. So they're like, surprise, it's not for this.
Just, oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And so, Julie, like, you're already coming across things that you've maybe asked a video person to do that you can't do.
Poor guy.
I've kept my clothes on. I promise.
It feels so awkward asking the next question. Have you ever had a client ask you to do something you weren't comfortable with? I'm talking strictly for real estate.
Yeah.
In a contract, perhaps?
So, I've heard a story, and this is like a huge no-no in our business. So, oil tanks. It's like such a bad... It's just like, there's always that clause in our contracts, Jared, like warranting there's no underground oil tanks, right?
Which used to be an old way of heating homes. So for anyone listening that doesn't know what an oil tank is, a big drum under the earth that would supply oil to the home to heat it.
Yeah.
And they don't use them anymore. But if they're left behind, it's a big issue. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this isn't my story, but one that I think is so crazy. So there's something called a filler tube with the oil tank, and like if you cut it off, you won't ever know there's an oil tank.
Right.
So this client was like, nope, I'm not disclosing it. I'm not disclosing the oil tank.
Oh.
Yeah. So then he goes and cuts off the filler tube because it's the only thing sticking up.
Can't see the thing out of the ground.
If you do a scan, you'll know there's an oil tank there.
Right.
But client goes, nope, not disclosing it. I'm going to cut off the filler tube. So he goes, cuts it off, and sells it and never discloses it.
No.
Yeah. And if, like, that is a huge expense to get out.
Yeah.
The oil tank.
Because sometimes
Absolutely.
they leak and they get into the soil or
And then it's
nearby
in-
streams.
Yeah.
It's like $80 a pound or something to remove the contaminants from the soil. And that was a quote I heard like 10 years ago. So it's probably more
way
now.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the agent just sold it?
I'm not sure
They
what
knew?
happened.
They were like, not a problem.
I don't know
Let's
what
get
happened.
this done.
I think they ended up dealing with it properly, but the client was like, nope, I'm not disclosing it. I'm going to cut it out. Probably was like, oh, I if you're going to disclose it, I don't want to use you kind of thing, I'm sure.
Wow.
If they're
Right.
thinking that, they're probably thinking, well, I'm just going to do it either way because some agent's going to represent me, right? I'm just not going to tell the next agent.
Yeah.
So it's like crazy how you have to screen your clients, like how you guys are saying.
Yeah.
That you're kind of like, okay, even when you fill out that form with them disclosing certain things, they may know something that they're just not disclosing and choose not to tell you.
Totally.
So you're representing them. So that's why screening people is just so important.
When I onboard a client, I go over basically like my core values, and I talk about integrity. And I'm like, guys, I'm not going to lie to you to a T. I will not lie to you, and I don't want you to lie to me. And like, cause like the second you catch a seller or a buyer in a lie, it's like,
Yeah.
because there's so much money. Like these are not, the houses aren't 400,000 anymore. They're like, 1.4 million. So it's a lot of money. And if you're purposefully kind of like screwing the next guy, like what does that say about you? Because if they're willing to do that to a stranger and they've already met you, what are they willing to do to you?
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, so I have a question. So if somebody like lies on a disclosure statement and then they get caught later by like the people that move into the house, what can happen?
So we did an episode on this where we had a gentleman named Terry come in, and we found out that the sellers had purposefully answered the property disclosure statement wrong and hid damage. Okay. And we were able to compare the two so we could prove that they knew or ought to have known that there was a problem.
Right.
I can't remember what the title was called.
I'm going to find it.
Yeah,
I'll
we'll try.
insert
We'll pop it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll pop. Yeah, so
Pop up
we'll have
video.
the episode pop up, but that's exactly what can happen if you've got somebody who lies and you can find out that they contradicted that law.
Yeah.
Basically,
Right.
yeah. So how would you manage a conversation with that person being an agent? You know, because like obviously that wasn't you, but what if it was? Like, what if you had that person come to you because you're caught between, you know, I'd like to make this deal come together, but I don't necessarily agree with what's going on.
That is not worth it.
Yeah.
That is not worth it. Walk away 1,000%. They're going to try and blame you. They're going to try and sue you and go after you. I've had minor things where I'm like, oh, no, let's not do that. Like, say we're staging a home and, you know, as agents, we bring in, you know, plants or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, oh, let's just move the plant and like hide that crack or hide this scratch or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but like, we're not trying to hide anything. We're just going to place it there. But their mentality is kind of like that. Like, let's hide this, let's hide that. And I'm like, and that conversation is a lot more gentle. It's just kind of saying, okay, like, we're not going to hide anything. They're going to do an inspection anyways. Like, it's okay. It's a scratch. Like,
It's not brand
Yeah.
new.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
people
And they know
forget that. They forget they're not
Right.
buying a brand new house. And if somebody comes in and they
Yes.
see something, like I'd rather them see it than like in that particular episode, we had someone remove a painting off a wall and there was a big cutout in the wall. Like it was
Yeah.
just
Right,
wild
right.
things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like that. That's a really good answer. It's not worth your license. And a lot of agents, especially if they're new, they think, oh, I have to work with this person. I guess I have to go along with it. And you don't. You do not have to work with everybody you come across.
Yeah.
For sure. And if you're a seller out there, please don't ask your agent to lie for you. Please don't do that. Let's keep integrity in the business.
Yeah.
I had a situation once with I hate even talking about it. You can tell me, like, you can tell that I'm struggling with this one because I just hate this so much. Not very often do I have a deal that I lose sleep over. But we had a situation where there was a buyer buying a tenanted property and he wanted to go in there and serve notice and all the rest of it. And the seller really loved the tenant and he didn't want the tenant disturbed. So we purchased the property and my client, the buyer, wanted to go in there and test for asbestos, test for things for demo, like look and see if the tree could come down in the backyard, all this kind of stuff. So he entered the property even though he was asked not to.
This
and
is
he
before completion, like before he actually owns.
he doesn't
Okay,
own it. Like
okay.
this is
Yeah.
the
Doesn't
space in
own it yet.
between that time. And he ended up on that doorstep knocking on the tenant's door. Well, the tenant phones the seller. Now the police are called.
Oh no.
So I've shown up because I know he is not supposed to be there. He is not supposed to be there. So now the police are there. And I have to be like, no, my client was, he's not supposed to be here. Like we were
Right.
given instruction. He's gone now. Everything's good. But like, that's what happened because let's be honest, the police, they just want to conclude the file and move to the next one, right? It's not a
Right.
real police situation, but he was an unwanted person and he knew he wasn't supposed to be there. And I had to stand there and watch it happen. And the realtor on the other end of the deal was so condescending. He's a big name in Cloverdale. And I just like, oh my goodness. And the stuff he would say to me on the phone would be like, oh, just put on your realtor pants and make him do this or make him do that. Or, why can't you stop him? And I'm sitting there going like, hello, like make him, like I don't have physical control. And I'm saying to him, you understand, I don't have physical control of my client, right? Like I can't physically control him. All I can do is show up and provide an accurate report of what's going on.
Yeah, we write real estate contracts.
Yes,
Right.
and this
We're
guy,
not bailiffs.
this guy just like did not understand that I could not physically, and it would have been so much better if that agent would have had like a shred of like being polite or understanding or empathy or anything like that.
Yeah.
But instead he was just a total condescending piece of work.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So it was really hard. It was hard to watch because I didn't agree with what was going on. And it's stressful when your client suddenly goes rogue on you because it becomes a total nightmare. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You're like, oh, don't do that. Oh, you're doing that.
Oh, you're doing it.
He's doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
like the
Please stop.
bridesmaids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, please stop. Stop that.
Yeah. It's not good.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, do you ever have a client like absolutely insist that you film something or do something you really don't think is going to pan out on camera? Like you talk about like the bad ideas, but if it's like contingent on that, or do you just like nip it in the bud right away?
it's, you know what, if somebody gets that persistent, we have a little saying at White Cloud that is, we'll take the logo off that one.
Oh,
I like it.
right, because it's a reflection of your work.
Right.
Yeah.
So if somebody is like, no, this is how I pictured it, it has to be like this. And if we, like, I'm vocal. If I'm like, I don't think that's the best idea, I don't think it's going to look great.
Yeah.
If they insist, we will shoot it for them. They are paying us.
Right.
But when we get back to editing, we're going to be like, once this is out in the world, we want no one to know that we were a part of it.
Right.
So, yeah, it happens.
Okay.
Thankfully, most people listen to us when we say, oh, that's probably not going to be the best.
Yeah. You're like, there's
But-
a reason why I have this opinion.
Yeah.
I do it a lot.
So sometimes you're flipping whiskey bottles in the air. Like, are you ever like, oh, that's an expensive one, I don't want to break it. But then they want you to like,
The client's like, I want a certain shot. Could you just do this while this is happening and don't break it, by the way.
No, the whiskey, I just do whatever I want.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Have you ever had anyone tell you that you're breaking the law, even though you're doing it all right? Like when you're filming, have you ever had anyone confront you and be like, "Can you stop filming me?" or whatever?
Oh.
Because
Yes.
there's no duty of what is it called when you're out in a public
Privacy?
place? Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're out in a public place, you
Expectation of privacy.
thank you expectation of privacy. What do
Right.
you do?
So we mainly run into this with drone operations again. So it happened down in Kits. I was setting up for a shoot, and the neighbor, she comes marching down her stairs, and she's like, "You're not planning on flying that here, are you?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am."
Bad
And-
news, Sally.
Yeah, totally. So I think a lot of people are mainly worried about their privacy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what, when people approach you and say you're doing something wrong, they're mainly worried about privacy. So reassuring people that, hey, actually with this lens, like, we can't even see your house. Or when we're flying the drone, we are focused on this house. We can see your house, but we're actually allowed to fly here.
Right.
And typically we can diffuse people pretty quick, but
Now you're gonna
That's
reply, "Is this within 200 yards of a school?"
it's
Yeah.
yeah, but it's especially, do you remember in the media a couple of years ago when the drone stuff was like going
Yeah, it was big
crazy?
in the
Yes.
news.
It was bad then. So
Yeah.
we were doing everything right, and I would have a drone in the air and somebody would be like, "I'm phoning the police right now."
Oh.
And it got to the point where I would be like, "Go ahead, we're doing everything fine, and I'll be gone by the time they get here anyway."
Yeah.
Because it got really popular for everyone to kind of have one, and
Yes.
they fly them around and they have fun with them. So you'd hear about them getting lost in other people's yards and things, and people started posting like, "Hey, I'm looking for my drone," and someone would say like, "I have it, but I'm not going to give it to you unless you can prove to me with the video you weren't looking in my house."
Totally.
And I'm like, "Yeah, that's a fair request."
I mean,
Totally.
I don't think I would want a drone looking at my house. Like,
No,
I don't
if-
know anyone who would. Like,
Yeah, you know, like my kids are in my backyard and there's a drone hovering over the
Yeah.
backyard.
Oh,
then
yeah.
you'd be like, what's going on there?
Yeah. Your
Um,
kids are flying your drone from
It's-
work. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think you're always suspicious, but I mean, I know enough to know that unless a drone is like this far away
Yeah.
from somebody, I can't tell it's Julie Pham,
Yeah.
right? It's such a wide angle. So,
right.
Right.
yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I imagine you probably came across that because it is a touchy subject. And do you have to carry like papers on you to like prove?
Yeah, so we
Okay.
have for sure one of our drone kits, we have the license and insurance and everything.
Perfect.
So yeah, and it's that diffuses, if somebody's like really hot-headed, that
Oh.
diffuses them right away.
Yeah.
You're
Nice.
like, no, I'm actually licensed, here's our insurance.
Mm.
And then they'll be like, okay.
Okay. Well, I imagine
That's
like
cool.
most of that is just wanting to know what you're doing in the area because they want to make sure you're not filming their backyard.
Totally.
Totally.
Yeah.
Julie, have you ever had your clients breach a contract and just be totally fine with it? Like, yeah, I know I'm in breach. I agreed to fix this, but I'm not going to fix it.
Almost. Like with completions. They
Oh.
couldn't complete. It was when the market was shifting and we'd bought and they hadn't sold yet and the market shifted. And then we couldn't sell their property because it was so unique. So many problems on it. So we had to keep lowering the price. But then at that point, it's like, okay, now we can't even complete. So it was kind of bad luck. But it worked out at the end. But nothing like nothing
Nothing
like,
intentional.
That's hard.
No.
'Cause, yeah, the intent was there to like everything
Yes.
go smoothly, but it just
Yes.
didn't pan out that way.
yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. That would technically be a breach because they're not fulfilling their obligations in the contract, but it's not that they're doing it on purpose. It's
Yeah.
like an unfortunate set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And you said that it ended up working out.
Yep.
And that's the cool thing about real estate. Like everything always looks doomsday sometimes, but it
Yes.
always kind of works out at the end.
Yeah.
And now when stuff kind of goes sideways and Sheila's like,
Sheila's voice is like increasing.
she's like, I don't really know. And I'm like, it'll be fine. Like, and that's me. I'm always like,
Yeah.
it'll be fine. No, it'll be okay. It always works out. And it,
Yeah.
for the most part, it does.
Yeah, like literally when I panic a little bit, you'll be like, just take a deep breath, and 24 hours later, it always pans out.
Yeah.
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 So we had a situation recently where we had a seller agree to fix a very small repair in the home. And it was in the market where everyone's getting squeezed. So it's like the seller gets squeezed and the buyer gets squeezed and then that buyer gets squeezed and everyone's heads are getting squeezed. And it comes down to negotiating over things like $500. Like,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and both sides are like, no.
Yeah.
We've given enough. And I'm sitting there going like, oh my God. And I'm doing like, it's only 0.0001 of the purchase price. Are you sure you can't find the 500? Like I'm sitting there going like, please, you know? And at that time, it's also the realtors are getting squeezed. So like that
Yes.
realtor's fixing
Totally.
something, you know,
Yeah.
I've already agreed to, you know,
Yes.
fix that. So everyone is squeezed. And eventually as a realtor, you just kind of want to be like, okay, fine, then lose the house over 500, like whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, in this situation, so that's the season that we're in. And I had sellers that agreed to fix something and they didn't end up fixing it. So the buyer comes back and they say, hey, listen, you agreed to fix this, as they should have. They should have come back to us and said, hey, you agreed to fix this. Why didn't you fix it? Took it to my, because at that point, after completion, after the keys are handed over, you're just messenger service. What are you saying? Okay, I'll relay it. Okay, I'll relay it. And you just go back
Yeah.
and forth and back and forth. So I relayed that information to my sellers, and the seller goes, we're done with the property. We don't really want to hear any more about it. And I'm like, cool. I have got to pass this information along to you. Just so you know, this is not coming from me. There is no more that I can contribute here. I'm hoping that you can read what they're saying, and please let me know what you want me to do with your instruction.
So it was in writing that they were going to fix
Oh
this?
yeah, addendums and everything.
Yeah.
Like
Oh.
it's in writing. It's in writing. Okay. And they said, thank you so much for contacting us about this. We no longer want to communicate about the property. So I'm like, okay. So I then have to go back to the buyer. So I go back to the buyer's agent and I'm like, hey, I have been given the instruction that I can't communicate on this topic anymore. And she's like, what? You got to tell them this and this and this and this. And I'm like, no, I can't tell them anything because they have instructed me not to talk to them.
Yeah.
And right. And so she's like, what do you mean you can't talk to them? And I'm so thankful that this agent was on the other end of the deal. She was so professional with me. It was so good because she's like, hey,
Yeah.
they're in breach of their contract. And I'm like, I know. They know. And at that time, my clients were like, they can sue us. They can just sue us.
Oh.
My word.
And I'm like, okay, because no one's going to sue.
Was it a big repair?
No.
No.
Tiny.
Like under 500?
Around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
Because sometimes people are just, they reach a limit and they're like, no,
Yeah.
done.
So the last thing that you want to say as a realtor is like, well, my client said you could just sue them. Like it was, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So now I'm calling the
Yeah.
managing broker, and the managing broker goes, you were given lawful instruction not to communicate with them anymore on the property. And I'm like, I know that, but like, I don't agree with it. Like, you know, because you don't necessarily agree.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, it's in writing. You have to do your
You have to.
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Right.
also understand that everyone's head got squeezed like 100 times. Okay?
Right.
Now, who are they going to blame that on? They're going to blame me. You know why? Because they think I lack the ability to communicate with my clients
Right.
that they are in breach of contract. And they're like, well, we're going to sue. And I'm like, okay. And I go back to my managing broker. My managing broker is like, yeah, you're going to have to tell your clients that because that could affect them. And I'm like, oh, thank God. So I end up
I can now talk to them.
I can now talk to my clients. So I talk to my clients and I'm like, I understand that you have instructed me not to talk to you about the property. I understand that you're not going to be compensating any further. I understand that, you know, whatever. And then I'm like, but this could affect you in the future. So I've been instructed by my managing broker to bring it
Yeah.
up to you that they could sue you.
Yeah.
And they're like, that's fine. Tell them they can sue us. And I'm like,
They said that in writing?
yeah, in a private conversation.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like I wouldn't be able to take that
Yeah.
anywhere. But I'm just like, okay. So I have to go back to them. So then I end up getting this email, and it was like an email that this buyer has decided he's going to send to the brokerage about my inability to force my client to pay him, and he thinks I should pay, and then I should sue my client for the different. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Like, so get on the phone to the realtor again, amazing, and she goes, Kristy, like, this is the letter he wrote, and I'm like, I'll send it for him. Let me send it for him. Let me send that to my managing broker so your client feels heard. But guess what? When it comes to helping him out, pretty sure that's where the buck stops. Because, like, this isn't me. I'm not doing anything. She goes, I know. I'm going to explain it to him. I think he just needed to vent at something, but I'm going to go back to him. I'm shocked she sent it to me, to be honest with you. But she's following the lawful instruction of her client.
Yes.
So now we're in this, like, circle of, like, I can't do anything.
It's like a standoff.
It was a standoff. And I'm sitting there going, like, I don't know what to do. And me and the agent are like, well, I'm glad you're on the other end of this deal. Yeah, it really sucks, doesn't it? Totally. Like,
You're doing a great job. You too.
Yeah.
All right.
We're just trying to keep each other positive in it. But I wasn't necessarily agreeing with what my client wanted. So I always ask agents, like, what would you do? And they were like, well, why didn't you just pay the money and fix it and close the gap and make it go away? So they want me to pay for it. Now, normally, I don't mind helping out here and there.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if a lawsuit is threatened and you end up paying, you're now looking like you're helping the buyer.
Right.
And you make your seller look super guilty because you're contributing money to an issue, and it makes it makes your side look bad.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even help. My hands were tied. Okay. Couldn't even help. But the fact that the buyer was like, why can't she control her client? Like, we can't force people to do things physically
Right.
or sending e-transfers, or we can't force people to sign things,
Make it so.
right?
No.
Yeah.
So that was a situation I was put in. And
Luckily with that one, cooler heads prevailed eventually, and it got sorted.
it all got sorted.
Okay.
I try to make people sleep on it. I'm like, hey, why don't we sleep on it?
Yeah.
And sure enough, like a day or so later, my sellers woke up and they're like, you know what? We want to do the right thing. And so they came through. But it was a lot of drama at the beginning.
Yeah. It was the brink of breach.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we'll call this episode.
Tiptoed, just a butterfly lash close.
Yeah. Have you ever had a client like threaten to sue another party?
No, but I've had people kind of be like, not afraid of it. I'm like, oh, you don't know the math.
Right.
There's scary math. There's scary math that comes with suing people. And so, I don't know. Sometimes people just think it's the deposit.
Oh, yeah. And you're like, no, it's damages.
Right.
Yeah, they're like, it's just a deposit. Like, they can take it. And I'm like, no. So I've never had scares like that. But,
It's such a gross thing to have to say out loud when you're like, oh, my client's good if you sue them, or there are lawsuits being threatened. Like, it's a horrible thing to like convey. I didn't want to tell them until the last second. I was like, oh, they're totally fine with that. Like, I just right.
But sleeping on it is good. I've had people be very fiery and be like, yeah, no, I'm confident with like what I want. This is what I want.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's sleep on it. And it really does fix a lot of issues.
Yeah. So on a final note of the episode, basically, sellers, buyers, please don't ask your realtor to do anything unlawful. And also kind of think, basically, like, how would the other person feel? To me, it's always about, like, how would this look if it was a headline? Like, that kind of thing. Like, if a court sought, who would they think was in the right? And also, if you're asking your agent to do stuff that they don't want to do, it just puts a bad taste in the mouth from the get-go. And if you're a realtor where your seller or buyer are asking you to do things that you don't agree with, you don't have to work with that person. We try to hammer that home, like, all day long. But unfortunately, if you get into a contract with someone and you're locked in, like I was with my guy, you got to ride it out. Yeah. When I handed over the keys to them, I was like, lose my number, peace, and I was out of there. So, like, you don't have to work with them in future, unfortunately, if you're tied with them. And realtors, be kind to one another, because you never know what that realtor's dealing with on the other end. You don't know why their client is going rogue or what's going over there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the realtor's fault. And that's everything. Thank you guys so much for coming out.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Spilling the Tea, a real estate podcast with Kristy Massero and Shelagh Maycheck.